sorrow of God? How do our actions bring about God's sorrow?
Yeah, and this is a hard one again. And we do need to say God doesn't feel emotions in quite the same way we do, because he is divine, he is sovereign, he is powerful, he is pure, he is not. But one of the very first things we find out about God in Genesis 6 is the evilness, the violence of humans caused God to feel, well, either sorrowful or regretful or grieved that he made humans. The Hebrew word there, naham, can kind of get translated in different directions. Different English translations go different ways, but it either says God was sorrowful or God was grieved. He was human evilness. When humans created in his image were harming other humans created in an image, it made him really, really sad. The author of Scripture talks about that, and then God himself says this. And I don't know.
You refer to this
One
in
of the
the
things I
book.
say is, say it again.
You refer to this in the book when you talk about your sons fighting, or you fighting with your brother. It grieves the parents when the kids are fighting because you want them to get along and you want them to love one another. Therefore, it elicits that emotion of sorrow within us. I see that with my children. My middles get in these little bickering fights, and I hate it. I hate it, and I'm always trying to
Yeah,
stop them because I
yeah.
want them to love one another. I mean, just to give each other a hug. I the oldest and the second for a while didn't really like each other, like siblings are prone to do. Nothing that it's different than any other family. And then in recent years, you've seen them have this relationship develop, and it does this dad's heart good to see those girls give a hug to one another, because
Yeah.
that's what I want to see. But when any of my kids are at odds with one another, I'm sorrowful. And that's the same idea, right? That's what you're talking about with God.
And one of the things that it is, again, the sorrow of God is not as big of an emotion as compassion or love, but it shows quite a bit. And obviously, there are several places in the Gospels, most perhaps famously when Jesus was talking to Mary and Martha in John 11, and Mary and Martha's brother Lazarus had died. Jesus comes, sees the grief there, and Jesus weeps.
Mm.
He weeps over Jerusalem, in Luke's gospel as well. But I think one of the things that was, again, maybe the most surprising thing about this is there are so many people in the Bible who weep.
Mm.
Hezekiah wept as he was praying. I'm teaching the book of Nehemiah right now. When Nehemiah finds out about the situation on the wall, he weeps. Joseph weeps more than anybody, perhaps. Although David weeps a lot too. So one of the things I say is, Jesus in the Gospels weeps, and Jesus's followers will need to weep too. We should be broken up, sorrowful by the tragedy of death, the tragedy of sin, the tragedy of children, our children maybe particularly, that don't get along. And that should break our heart. Because again, what is motivating this sorrow and these emotions is ultimately love. And so that's, again, helpful for me to see. Emotions and weeping is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of humanity. Although I would also say it's a sign of divinity. There's a hint when we weep that we are like God, because our God is a God who weeps. And that's something that I think we need to talk about more.
I agree that God does. I mean, Jesus wept. You even refer to that
Yeah.
at the face of death, and
Yeah.
it's something to again remind ourselves. I heard of a pastor one time, and he goes, Jesus didn't cry because of Lazarus' death. He cried because of their unbelief. And I'm like, I don't think that's the case. I think you're seeing the full humanity on display at what death does, and just sorrowful of it. Yes, he knew about the resurrection, but again, he's not removed from it. He's not this stoicist. And while he knows, it doesn't mean that removes the emotion of what's happening and what has occurred.
Yeah. Notice how did the people around Jesus respond to Jesus's tears? They weren't like, oh, this is weird that, this divine being, he's not weeping at death. He's weeping because they lack faith. That's not how they respond. They go, see how he loved him. They
Mm,
interpret it as love, which
mm,
again, that's how the text itself interprets his behavior. I've heard that response. I don't agree with it. I know what the Greek word there is. It often can be associated. There's words there that kind of are used to describe how Jesus was feeling. I'm not convinced, but Jesus wept because he loved him, and that's how the people
mhm.
interpreted in that context.